Hi, Children's Church. Pastor Mike and Miss Jessica, we miss you so much, and we cannot wait till all of this is over so we can be back here in Children's Church again. So in the meantime, we are going to start doing a Children's Church missionary story just like old times, and we're going to have it available every Sunday for you to watch. When you watch, make sure you pay attention because Pastor Mike is going to post questions that you can download and answer and submit to him. You can email your answers to him. You can text your answers to him. Any way you can get them to him. They need to be, he needs to have them by next Saturday. And everybody who does that, your name will be entered into a drawing for a very special prize. And every Sunday, when I come on here next week to tell my story, I'm going to announce the winner. So make sure that you pay attention. Have your parents find those questions so you can answer them, okay? So today we're going to start a new missionary story called A Little Rascal Who Became a Man of God. This is a true story, just like most of the stories Miss Jessica tells, and this is a story about a man named Anthony Rossi. And you're going to hear how he really was a little rascal and how he eventually became a man of God. So let's get started. Make sure you have your listening ears on, okay? So Anthony was laying in bed asleep one day, and he was listening to the sound of his family snoring and breathing. You know how they have that... He was listening to them, and all of a sudden, he started hearing a rumbling. He heard a rumbling outside, and then all of a sudden, his whole house began to shake. Everything was shaking, and things were falling, and the noise was so loud, and all of a sudden, his family awoke, and they shouted, "Terremoto! Terremoto!" So I have a question. What do you think terremoto is? What do you think would cause the whole house to rumble and shake? If you said tornado, you're wrong. It wasn't a tornado. It was an earthquake. So they were having a big, big earthquake. How many of you have ever been in an earthquake before? Miss Jessica has, and they're pretty scary. We actually had one here in Maryland several years ago when Garrett was a baby. He slept through the whole thing. I actually have a funny story I'm going to tell you real quick about an earthquake that Miss Jessica was in when I was a little girl. My brother and sister and myself, we were visiting my father, and when we would visit him, we would sleep on the floor in sleeping bags. And I don't know how this happened, but this night, my sister, she had her sleeping bag zipped up. She had flipped over to where her head was in the bottom of the sleeping bag, and her feet were sticking out the open side. So all of a sudden, the whole house starts to shake, and we know it's an earthquake. It wakes us all up. And when you live in an area where you have earthquakes, you know what to do. You know to get in a doorway or get out of the house. So we jump up and we run to get in this doorway. And my sister stands up, but she's in the closed end of the sleeping bag, and all that is out is her feet. And she knows there's an earthquake, and she's trying to run to the door, but she can't see anything. So we're all screaming, "Jen, this way, this way." And Jen's falling all over things she can't see. And finally, the earthquake stops, and there's Jen still wandering around the house in her sleeping bag, trying to find her way to safety. And praise God, she wasn't hurt, other than probably some stubbed toes. But that's my funny story about an earthquake. But this is not a funny story. So in Italy, this was a massive, massive earthquake. They got out of their house. They looked across the city in Italy where they lived and realized that there were no buildings left. Everything had crumbled to the ground. So they get out of the house and they realize we have nowhere to go. So they thought, let's go a little ways away to where our Aunt Amelia lives. So they travel to Amelia's house, and they thought that they would be safe there. And they go to her house and they realize that when you have big earthquakes, a lot of times you have hundreds of aftershocks. So those are more earthquakes that come. So even if they could get to their aunt's house, nobody stays inside when this happens. They stay outside. So now here they are. They're stranded. They have no home. They have no food because all their food is buried in the buildings. They have nothing. And little Anthony, he was only 6 years old. He didn't understand what was going on. He was so scared. And after so many days of not having help, not having food, his stomach would hurt. They would pick lemons off their aunt's lemon tree and try to eat those. That's all they had. But the lemons were so sour. And it would just make his stomach cramp. And he couldn't eat the lemons. Well, finally, they got word that Anthony's older brother, Ricardo, he was away helping a family who was sick. He was trying to mend them back to health. And they got word that his brother, Ricardo, had died. And Anthony quickly stopped thinking about his empty stomach, and he started thinking about his big brother, Ricardo. His brother was always caring and loving, and Anthony just didn't understand how amongst the death of his brother, 80,000 other people had died from this earthquake. It was a big earthquake. Well, finally, after 3 days, 3 whole days, a rescue ship came to Sicily, and now finally they had some bread and butter that they could eat. The ship brought bread and butter. Could you imagine, boys and girls, after not eating for 3 whole days, how amazing bread and butter would taste? Oh, I bet it was so good to them. And it also meant that this ship could take them to a safe place where they could stay and get shelter and food, and they would live there amongst a bunch of other people while their house was being built. So that's what they did. They took this boat and went to where that they could live to rebuild their home and their lives. And as they were doing this, Tony, he thought often about the earthquake. As I would imagine you guys would think about it a lot. That was probably a very scary thing to go through. But he he heard his grandmother speak of something she called Judgment Day. And he wondered if the day of the tornado would be something like what Judgment Day would be. Would Judgment Day be like a massive, scary tornado that would just demolish everything? Looking up into the cloudless blue sky, Tony thought about his brother also, Ricardo. Ricardo was good, so he was probably in heaven. If Tony had died, he probably wouldn't have gone to heaven because he wasn't a good boy. And this was Tony's thinking. Well, my brother was good, so he's probably in heaven. And if I were to have died, I wouldn't have gone to heaven because I'm not a good boy. Which we know, boys and girls, isn't true. We don't get to heaven by being good. No, we get to heaven by putting our trust in Jesus Christ, and you know that. So Tony, just like the title of our story says, he was always getting into trouble. He truly was a little rascal. And he, everywhere he went, he was known as a rascal. They would call him Birbanti, which means rascal. So that was his nickname, Birbanti. And something Tony would do reminds me of some of you boys and girls. In particular, who came to my mind was Joshua Schultz and Leo Ryder. And what he would do was they called this a horseless carriage. And we know that this is a car or a vehicle, but it is what he called a horseless carriage. And so what Tony would do all the time was when he would see a horseless carriage drive up, he would run with the car, and he would try to run faster than the car. Now, Tony was extremely fast, so it was quite a sight to see. He would run and run and run and run, and a lot of times he could run just as fast as the car. And when I was reading over this, I kept picturing Leo and Josh running with my car, because you guys do that often. You guys must have some rascal in you, like Anthony. So anyway, that's what he would do, and he became known as a little rascal. He also would do other things that gave him the reputation of being a rascal. He skipped school a lot. He almost never went to school. And one day, his papa came up to him and he said, "Tony, I want you to go to school today. You must go to school." Tony, he didn't like school, because when he was inside, he would look outside and he would think, "Oh, there's so many adventures going on out there." Adventures he wanted to have, not in a schoolroom. And his father said, "I want you to go to school today. Here's 10 cents for your recess." And he said, "Oh, well, my dad's being so nice. He really wants me to go to school. He gave me money. I guess today I'll go to school." So he decided to go to school. But as he walked 1 block toward his school, he quickly forgot about going to school, because his buddy Giovanni came up to him and said, "Hey, man, what do you want to do today?" He said, "My dad wants me to go work on his fishing boat with him, but I don't want to go again." And Tony said, "Well, I guess we could go on an adventure." Just like that, the thought of going to school left Tony's mind, and here he is going to skip school again. His friend said, "Why don't we hike to the other side of Sicily and see what it's like? I've always wanted to see what it's like." So without even thinking, Anthony says, "Okay, let's go." Well, in order to get from one side of a big, massive town to the other, you have to have certain things. You have to have money. You have to have food, because it's going to take a long time. And Anthony said, "How much money do you have?" And Giovanni checked his pockets. "Oh, I don't have any." He says, "Well, I only have 10 cents. That won't buy us everything we need." So they concocted a plan. He said, "Okay, let's go. We're going to go hide. And when everyone goes to bed, we're going to sneak into their houses and we're going to rob them, and we're going to take everything that we need." So they did just that. They went and hid in a broom closet, and they came out. And when everyone was asleep, they would sneak in, and they would take coffee and bread, anything they could put in their pockets. They took a pot to cook things with, and they would stash it in their broom closet. Then they would sneak to the next apartment, and they would take what they needed from them. And they kept doing this. They kept doing this until they had what they needed for their adventure. Well, as they were sneaking in and out of the broom closet and sneaking in and out of the apartment buildings, all of a sudden they heard someone yelling at them, shouts from behind them. "There they are! There's Tony!" And Tony and Giovanni started running as fast as they could to get away from the voice that they heard hollering at them. Well, that's where we're going to stop today. Just a short lesson. Next week, we'll find out what happens. Maybe they get caught and dragged back home, and maybe they get a big paddle for ditching school and robbing their neighbors. Maybe not. Maybe they get away and they get to go on their adventure. But you'll see throughout the next couple of weeks how he truly is a little rascal. So that's the end of our story for today. Make sure that you download the questions that Pastor Mike's going to post and answer them. Get them to him by next Saturday. And your name will be entered into a drawing, everyone who submits their answers. And next Sunday, when you watch the lesson, you'll get to hear the announcement of who won the prize and what it is. Okay? See you guys next time.